Okay. Parshas Sotah. Parshas Naso, excuse me. So let's talk about the Sotah procedure, but first, I want to talk about Judaism's view on modesty. By modesty, I mean there's a lot of laws in the Torah about sexual morality. So where does that? What's the idea behind that? So there's a pasuk in the Torah, verse in the Torah, in Vayikra actually. I think we might have spoke about it here. It says, "Kamaisa eretz Mitzrayim asher yishavtem ba lo tasu." Like the deeds of the land of Egypt, where they dwelt, you shall not do. Where you dwelt, you shall not do. And in the land of Canaan, where I'm bringing you, don't do like all of their acts. So the Canaanites and the Egyptians were known to be very immoral people when it came to the realm of sexuality. They just had relations with anybody they felt like it and did whatever they want. So the Torah specifically warns us to not be like that. The Torah commands us to be modest in the way we act in this area. Now, what's the idea behind that? Right, why is this such a focus? He says, because if a person is just going after his physical desires and his physical pleasures to, look for his next pleasure fulfillment, then he can't focus on anything meaningful in his life. God put us here to accomplish certain things. We have a spiritual mission to come close to Hashem. And if a person is constantly thinking about, which it's called znus, acts of sexual immorality, then he will totally waste his life and not be able to focus on anything productive in his life. Okay. So, in fact, when Bilam came to curse the Jewish people, when Bilam came to curse the Jewish people, he couldn't just get Hashem to curse the Jews, and God would bring bad things upon the Jews for no reasons. So you know what he did? He hired prostitutes to seduce the Jewish men, so that they can sin specifically in that way, so that the Jewish people would be culpable. And then Bilam could curse the Jews, and they would be liable for something, so Hashem would punish them for that. And it says, because the God of the Jews, Bilam said, hates sexual immorality. This is something that Hashem does not like. Now, if you look at the Torah, as we mentioned, you see that there are a lot of rules when it comes to this. There's something called yichud, which we know, that a man is not allowed to be secluded with a woman, lest he come to temptation. The Gemara says, "Ein apu shabos larais." When it comes to these kinds of things, people have a very, very strong desire to violate these prohibitions. So therefore, the Chazal, the rabbis, instituted many laws to make sure that doesn't happen. They recognize the fact that when that urge takes hold of a person, it's almost impossible to control. So the rabbis saw fit to make rules so that a man doesn't incite those urges, so he doesn't even come to a place of temptation. Putting politics aside, Mike Pence, he had a very praiseworthy practice. He wouldn't meet alone with a woman over dinner because he was worried what could happen. Now, this is always portrayed by certain people as Judaism being a patriarchal society with the men trying to oppress women, but it's actually far from that. It's a religion which recognizes that men can be animals, right? When a man's passions gets aroused, he does totally irrational things. He can do very inappropriate things. So the rabbis and the Torah recognize that we have to put a stop to this before it even starts. That's why you find it from weddings that men and women dance together. Many of the weddings they dance separately. From weddings, they dance separately. They do not dance together. And many from weddings also, they even sit separately.
You have to cut that out.
But I'll have to go back and cut that out. Erase the last 10 seconds.
They have to sit separately.
No, they don't have to, but just many weddings, they do that as another...
Why does dancing make sense? But seating could be or could not be.
Right, so it depends on the community that you're from.
Right.
But the reason behind it is so that people, you can get very...
Minimize. Minimize the
Right, minimize the risk. People at weddings especially are very joyous. They might be drinking a little too much, and things can happen. So the Jewish people are very careful in this area. And we see that Hashem hates zima. He hates sexual immorality. My Rosh Yeshiva pointed out as an article that's printed in his book, The Eye of the Storm. It's an article about an article that was in Lilith magazine. Lilith magazine is a very prominent feminist publication. So they had an article about a certain religious figure. He was a rabbi. I'm not going to say who it was, and he was praised in this feminist article for taking down. It was either the comments or the article for taking down certain barriers that were between the sexes, like the mechitza, taking that down, and how progressive he was and destroying all of the separations between men and women. But the same article was also very upset because, on the one hand, they say he was so great because he was taking away the barriers between men and women, but on the other hand, he committed acts which were of questionable moral nature. When it came to his interactions with women, he was a powerful man, a charismatic leader, and he took advantage of women. So this magazine article and the commentators on the article were bothered. How could it be that you have someone who was so progressive, breaking down the boundaries between the sexes, yet he took advantage of women? But Rosh Yeshiva said that's the whole point. That's the whole thing. The boundaries between men and women are what keep a person from doing that, usually men, from taking advantage of women. And this article was trying to find ways to how to keep powerful men from taking advantage of women. But the idea is not just powerful men, but every man. The Torah recognizes that every man has to be controlled when it comes to these things. So he said, Hagufa. It was because, he was becoming lax in these areas of modesty that enabled him, gave him the opportunity to awaken his Yetzer Hara to do these things. I wrote in my book a story from Rav Moshe Avrik. He was just like an anecdote. I'm sure the guys here can relate to this. He was in a shul, I think it was in Israel, and it was a very spiritual experience, a lot of inspiring tunes on Friday night, and then, who gets up to deliver the Dvar Torah? A woman who is, he said, very attractive, and she was married, dressed very modestly, but he said after the woman gave the Dvar Torah in front of the shul, a very attractive woman, he said he wasn't able to focus on the davening anymore, and he spoke to other men who were in the synagogue, and they had the same experience, because that's why there are rules of modesty, because the Torah has a realistic recognition about the male sex drive, and that's why there are so many of these laws and regulations between men and women in Judaism. In fact, someone told me they saw the guidelines for the U.S. Army, and if you regarding relationships between male and female soldiers, and they said if you read it, it's like the laws of Yichud in the Shulchan Aruch and the Code of Jewish Law, the laws of how to keep a man and women separately. You can only have a man and a woman can't be together, but if there's two men, it's okay because they're not going to do anything if there's another man there. So society is beginning to recognize that there is wisdom in these laws that are thousands and thousands of years old, because Chazal and the Torah have a realistic recognition of the male sex drive, and it has nothing to do with suppressing women, chas v'shalom. Now, let's go to specifically, why are we talking about this? Because this week's parsha talks about the Sotah. The Sotah procedure. What was the Sotah procedure? So a man sees if a woman commits adultery, which means a married woman, and she has relations with someone who's not her husband, so her and the man that she had relations with get killed. But that's only if you have witnesses, and she's warned, and they're warned not to do the act. Now, why is it that we don't find that a married man, if he has relations with a woman, right? It's not the best thing to do, but he's not going to get killed for it. It's not a capital offense in Judaism. So the reason is because a man could technically have more than one wife. The way that a man's soul is, he could have several wives. But the way that a woman's soul is, the way that God made it, she cleaves to one man. That's the way. So there's Kabbalistic ideas behind it, why the penalty applies. But that's only if there are witnesses and there's warning to a woman and the man she's committing adultery with that they would get killed. Now, what about this case? So the Torah talks about the Sotah, which is a different case. That's where a guy sees his wife, she's becoming a little friendly with a certain fellow, and whether it's the UPS driver or the Amazon guy, whatever it is, and she says, "Hey," he says, "don't seclude yourself with that man. I don't like what's going on here." Okay, so she was warned. She goes, and 2 witnesses see her in a private place with this guy. Now, they didn't see that they had relations. They don't know what happened. But she went and secluded herself. So what happens? They take her to the temple, and in front of all the people, they go through this whole procedure. They write Hashem's name, they erase it, and they make her drink this water where they put the name in. And if she was guilty, then she dies in like a miraculous way. Her innards fall out, and the man that she slept with, wherever he is, dies also. So, what's up with this? Why are we going through all this? So the Ramban writes, this is Vihine, Ein b'chol mishpatei haTorah davar tali b'neis. Zulasi ha'inyan hazeh shehu pele b'neis kavua sheyaseh b'Yisrael b'yosam rubam oisem ritzono shel makom. He says, we don't find anything else in the Torah that is dependent on a miracle. A set miracle, right? It's a miracle that happens, right? If she's guilty and she committed adultery and she drinks this thing, she's gone. She's dead. So, ki chafetz l'man tzitol yasser anashim shelo tasinu ke zimas yasser ha'amim u'lenakos Yisrael min ha'mamzeres yiroi lahashros shchina b'seichem. The Ramban says the reason is because when the Jews are on a very high level, and a very, very holy level, Hashem wants to ensure that they keep their sanctity. And that there shouldn't be any mamzerim, any illegitimate children, so that the Shechina could rest with the Jewish people. And he says, therefore, the Sotah only works when the Jewish people are on this high level. He says, when there started to be more adultery in the Jewish people, the Sotah procedure didn't work anymore. This was only a procedure that happened when the Jewish people were very, very holy. In fact, it only works if the husband is a very holy guy, that he never committed any acts of immorality. Right? Because this whole thing, this isn't just like, for random people, like it wouldn't work for our generation where everyone's doing whatever, but if you had, where the Jewish people, they're all very holy, they all, are just with their spouses and nothing else happens, and you have one person doing this thing, a rarity that happens, then this procedure would serve to cleanse the Jewish people. But in Jewish history, when it happened that we weren't on such a high level, it didn't work anymore. And like I said, if the husband wasn't on a high level, then the procedure didn't work. So this was to ensure what we were mentioning before, which Judaism puts such a high level on, is the purity of the Jewish people in this area. Now, I just want to read a part of a Mishnah in Sotah, certain aspects of the procedure, and then I would like to present a question that Rav Chaim Sichos Moser, spaced out. Amir. Rav Chaim Shmulevitz, thank you, Steve. Totally spaced out. Okay, thanks, Steve, for providing that info. I had a blank, went blank. So I'd like to present a question that he asks and an answer that he says, which I think is a very good lesson. So what does the Mishnah say? What would we do with the Sotah? So, we would take her to the high court in Jerusalem. So there were 71 judges. This is like the Supreme Court. Imagine you take a woman in front of the Supreme Court in Washington, D.C., instead of 9 judges there, you have 71, and they're all in their black robes, and you have all the guests, everyone there looking, watching this woman. What?
Talesim and white beards.
Yeah, instead of the black robes, you have talesim and white beards. Probably the Kohanim there. We scare her. We scare her the way that we scare witnesses in a capital case. When you have witnesses testifying on someone did something that deserves the death penalty, we scare the witnesses to make sure that they're telling the truth. It's not something we mess around. So we scare her just like we scare those witnesses. It's a young lady. Listen, you probably had a lot to drink. Harvey Choko say you're probably just joking around with the guy. Harvey Aldiso say a lot of things happen in youth. Harvey Shchedim Harayim Osin. You probably had bad neighbors. They're trying to give her excuses, meaning they want her to admit. Just say, because if she says that she did it, she doesn't have to drink the stuff. She's going to get divorced. She's not going to get ksuba, but she's not going to die. We don't want her to die, so they're trying to scare her and say like, hey, things happen. You made a mistake. You drank a little too much. You're hanging out with the wrong crowd. We don't write Hashem's name. That'll have to be erased. So if she says that she's tamei, she says she's impure, she doesn't get ksuba and she goes out. If she says that, no, I didn't do anything, we bring her to the Shar Nicanor, we bring her to the eastern gate, and then we give her the Sotah water, and they rip off part of her clothes, and it's the whole thing. So Tosfos, Reb Chaim Shmulevitz points out that Tosfos says that technically you don't even need to bring her, like according to the letter of the law, you don't need to bring her in front of the court of 71 judges, right? There are different courts in Jewish law. If you go for monetary laws, it's like a court of 3, and then we have this court of 71 people. So he says, you don't even have to do that, but we do it anyway. It's not technically required. So he says, why? Why are we going through all this? Let's think about it here. She knows what she did, right? If she's guilty, and we have to scare her to admit, doesn't she not want to die? Why do we have to scare her so much? Right? I assume that she doesn't want to die. It's enough already. A court of 71, scare her, try to make excuses for her so she admits. Why wouldn't she admit anyway? So
she's going to get embarrassed anyway.
What?
Because she's going to get embarrassed anyway.
What do you mean?
Right, well...
Why is she afraid to admit? Because she might get embarrassed. But if she's exposed, she's also going to get embarrassed.
So she's going to be embarrassed both ways.
Right.
So let her admit.
Well, she might be calling a bluff, too, that whatever she drinks might not do whatever.
It's a big risk.
It is a big risk, but...
Big risk.
She's scared either way, so,
Right, no, I'm assuming we're dealing with people that are, it's not like nowadays where, people believe, they don't believe. Back then, people believed. They knew something could happen. But I was thinking what you were saying also. Yeah, this is a good point.
Yeah, I mean, people are superstitious, but it's maybe I'll call the bluff and see what happens.
Yeah, it's a big...
but it's happened by other ladies.
That too. It reminds me of the Simpsons. Remember the Simpsons episode when the guy, the James Bond episode, when he blows up the bridge, and he says, if you don't pay me the money, I'm going to blow this up, I'm going to blow up this bridge, and the bridge explodes, and someone's like, maybe it was a coincidence. So that's maybe it's a coincidence. But again, we're dealing with the times of the First Temple when there were miracles all the time, or in the Mishkan even, there were miracles all the time. Even in the desert, people saw, prophets, and it seems like there was a bigger faith in Hashem at that time. But you're right, there is a valid point. Rav Chaim Shmulevitz suggests something else, which is also a true point. He says that you see how much a person doesn't want to admit he made a mistake.
Sure.
And he says, people will rather die sometimes than admit that they were wrong.
That's 100% true.
Yes. Chaim Shmulevitz says it. And Darren. No. No, it's true. So he says, we have to scare it.
We'll never wrong.
We have to scare her as much as possible to get her to admit, because the Torah knows human nature. People do not want to admit that they were wrong. She does not want to admit that she sinned. He brings several examples there, but another example he brings of this concept, that after the Jewish people, when they entered the land of Israel, after the 40-year sojourn in the desert, they came to Jericho. And they marched around Jericho, the walls came down, they conquered Jericho. And Yeshua said, do not rebuild Jericho. Right? Whoever rebuilds Jericho is going to be cursed. So what happened? Pasuk in Malachim, Aleph, Tezayin, Lamed Daled. B'yamav Banachiel, face Ha'eli Chiel, started rebuilding Jericho. So what happened? Ba'aviram B'chayra Yisto. His firstborn son, Aviram, he buried when he laid the foundations.
Who was this person?
His name was Chiel.
Is he like a king or?
Bethelites. I don't think so. I don't know his backstory. But yeah. So what happened? So he started building the foundations of Jericho, and he buries his firstborn son.
It was just a coincidence.
Just a coincidence. Ubeskuv Tziro Hittiv Delaseh, and his younger son Skuv, he buried when he made the doors to the city. Kidvar Hashem, like Hashem said, Asher Diber B'yad Yeshua ben Nun, like he said to Yeshua ben Nun. So if this guy was building Jericho, and there was a curse known by God that if someone rebuilds Jericho, bad stuff is going to happen, and as he's laying the foundation, his firstborn son dies, what would a normal person do? You would think a normal person would stop building the city. That's not what he did, because that's not what normal people do. People do not want to admit they're wrong, to the point where he was willing to bury his other children because he didn't want to admit that he was wrong. He saw in his face that God was cursing him. right? He says not only that, right? It's also he ties this in, really a similar concept to the first thing that you think. It's very hard to change. That's why a judge is not allowed. You have two litigants coming before a judge, before a dayan. The dayan isn't allowed to speak to one of the litigants before, because if you speak to him before, you already are favoring that side, because your muskal rishon, the first thing you think, is very hard to change. And he says that's one of the reasons why we paskin like Beis Hillel. Right? Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, they have all those debates. We paskin, the law is like Beis Hillel. And the Gemara in Eruvin says, Mipnei ma zachu Beis Hillel likvo halacha k'mosan. Why do we paskin like Beis Hillel? Mipnei shenochen v'alubin hayu v'shonim divrayim v'divrei Beis Shammai. So they would, when Beis Hillel was learning in their yeshiva, they would also learn the words of Beis Shammai. V'lo od, not only that, ela shemagdimin divrei Beis Shammai l'divrayim. They would say the words of Beis Shammai before they said their own shita, because they knew if you say your own opinion first, then you're going to be biased towards that opinion. So they would say the words of the other side, of Beis Shammai, so they can give everything an equal weight. So since they were so humble in that search for truth, that's one of the reasons that we paskin like Beis Hillel. But he brings out this concept from Sotah and these other places that people do not want to admit that they're wrong. And that's something that we have to be when we're, it's very difficult, obviously, to admit that you're wrong and things like that. But when we're cognizant of it, that's something that we can improve on, right? Someone was just asking me over Shavuos, about the truth of the oral Torah. And just one thing I was mentioning to him is that the more you learn, the more you see in the Gemara, the more you see the truth and the honesty of the sages. The beginning of the Elam Mitzvahs, you have a debate between Abaye and Rava. Yeush Shalom Midas. Is it Yeush? Is it not Yeush? All this. Abaye brings a proof. Rava brings a proof, and it looks like that Rava has Abaye on the ropes. He brings a proof. Abaye has nothing to answer, and what happens? Rava says, "You know what, Abaye? You could answer like this." Rava comes to Abaye's defense, because it's not about a battle of who's better, who's winning, because both Rava and Abaye want to go, what's the truth? So if you're fighting with your chavrusa and you're screaming at each other and you bring a proof, and this one brings a proof, you don't want to admit you're wrong, but you're not coming for a battle to disprove your chavrusa, you're coming to find the truth. You want to know what the real, what the intent of Hashem was, what the Gemara means. So if you have a proof to your friend, or if you realize you're wrong, that's something you have to admit. And you see that throughout the Gemara and throughout the sages, throughout the years of the sages, and even to the modern day, that when great rabbis realize that they're wrong, they admit it. It's a very difficult thing. So you see, that's just one of the things. You see the honesty and truth of the sages. Obviously, there's many other things about showing the veracity of the oral Torah, but we're not going to get into it now. But I just want to mention the story, famous story about Rav Chaim Soloveitchik when he was trying out to be Rosh Yeshiva of Volozhin. So he was asked to give a class to the entire yeshiva. Show your stuff. Let's see what you got. Impress us. So he gets up there and closes Gemara. He thinks a little bit. He says that what I was going to say is wrong, and he walks off. He was smart enough. Reb Chaim Soloveitchik was smart enough to fool everybody and give a class, and nobody would know that he was that he was making something up. He could have gotten away with it, but he was honest. There's no such thing as sacrificing the truth of Torah for one's own honor. When you're a great rabbi, when you're a good Jew, you just want to get to the truth of Torah. You want to get to the truth, the emes, what Hashem wants from us. Okay, let me just conclude with one more idea about Sotah. Right after the Sotah procedure in the Torah, we have Nazir. The Nazir was the person who took a vow not to drink wine, not to cut his hair, and other things. He took certain practices to make himself holy. So why is Nazir right after Sotah? So the famous Rashi says, why is Nazir right after the parsha of Sotah? Whoever saw the Sotah procedure, saw this whole thing with the woman exploding, he should become a Nazir, because wine could lead to niyuf, could lead to acts of immorality. Why specifically if you saw the Sotah procedure? Right? Why Sotah? What if he just saw acts of niyuf, or saw something inappropriate? Why specifically Sotah? So I think many people say, I think my Rashiva also said this, that when a person goes through a moment of inspiration, if he doesn't do something with it, and he doesn't take it to the next level, continue it on, then he's worse off had he never been inspired. He becomes cynical. He becomes negative towards it. So you just saw the Sotah procedure. You saw a miracle. God gave a miracle to the Jewish people when they're on a very, very high, lofty level, that if someone does something wrong, a miracle will happen to punish the person, to erase the evil from the Jewish people. And he saw that. And he doesn't take that and do something in his life. He doesn't make a practical, concrete step. Then he's going to become cynical, and it's going to become worse than he'd never been inspired. So it's very appropriate to mention that now, because we just had Sfiras HaOmer, we just had Shavuos. I was inspired over Shavuos. I know many other people I think were inspired over Shavuos. So the time is we have to not let that inspiration go. We have to take a concrete step, make a practical Kabbalah. We have to accept something upon ourselves, make a concrete step in our everyday life to grow as Jews and take that inspiration with us, just like the Nazir took it from Sotah. Also, the Ramban says that we don't have, I believe it's the Ramban, we don't have spices at Havdalah on Yontif. We only have spices on Shabbos. So the reason we have the spices on Shabbos is because the neshama, our extra soul that we have on Shabbos, goes away. So that we shouldn't feel bad. We have a little bit of, we smell the spices. But we don't have it on Yontif. The reason is because the soul, the extra level that we get on Yontif, it never leaves us. We gained a new level on Pesach, we gained a new level on Shavuos, and we're different people than we were before the Yontif. So that level doesn't leave us, and with that we should take something we learned and put it into practice and activate it. And if you took your bike here, you should be careful because it's very dark.
All right.
Thanks for coming.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for the share. Beautiful.